Hello, everyone. I hope you're hearing me well. I would like to welcome you and everyone who has joined us with today's session. Also, I would like to welcome panelists Azzam, Benedikt, and Elias. Before starting the session, I need to mention that this session will be recorded and published later on YouTube on CFD YouTube channel. There are also some instructions for the audience. If you have any problem in connection, please log out and re-enter the room. Maybe that might be a helpful solution. Also, if anyone has any question, comments, or wanted to share that with us, please write us on the chat box, and we will allocate some time at the end of this session to discuss these questions and interact with your comments. Uh, Please let me welcome first with Azzam Moustafa. He finished his bachelor in English literature and has a diploma in computer engineering as well. He is accredited peace and conflict consultant from forumZFD Peace Academy in Bonn, Germany. He has worked before with Basma and Zaytuna Association in Beirut and Lebanon, and now he is working as a freelance consultant focusing on Syria peace building and conflict resolution interventions and the diaspora community in Germany. Benedikt Brammer holds a Master Architect and Civil Engagement. His education background focused on mediation. From 2013 till 2019, he was working for Forum Civil Peace Service in Lebanon and Jordan. He worked extensively on topics such as mobilization, community building and conflict transformation. Um, Yes, yes, has a different start from a completely different place because he moved from working in a pharmacy to the humanitarian and social development fields. In 2014, he had his master degree in conflict, security, and development from University of Sussex in Brighton in England. In 2015, you co-founded House Peace, community House of Peace, sorry, a community-based peace building organization in Lebanon, and currently you're working as a peace building and conflict sensitivity specialist. Okay, I'm glad to moderate this session, especially after I've read the study that Azzam and Benedikt shared that with me. This is a systemic study, an indispensable need for a new brief, and I found it so informative, insightful, and also at some point an eye-opening study because it's not only reorganized the factors and reorganize the whole image of the situation now in Syria for the civil community, but it's also illustrate and explain how these factors and dynamics work together to and reflects on the peace building process. However, once I've started reading, there was also a question in my mind, and it was question slash comment because I had this feeling that when we are speaking about peace, especially in the last 10 years in Syria, it was kind of unrealistic, irrelevant, also unexpected when we have people never reach any freedom, any dignity. There are many people who lost their beloved and they still don't know their faith anymore. So my question for you, Elias, because you helped designing this study. Also, you have studied that and worked on that intensively. So how can we really define the peace building process in Syrian context, and how this concept have changed over the last 10 years in Syria.
Thanks a lot, Wadiaa. Thanks, Azzam and Benedikt, for inviting me to be with you today. And thanks for the question. And to answer that, I will just give a very small introduction, like of the context why I'm here. Beginning of last year, Azzam Benedikt approached us at House of Peace to reflect on a research project about the future of Syria. The magic word was peace, and that was more than enough to hold our attention. From perspective of a peace-building organization, critical peace research with a regional approach, co-led by a Syrian, is of high interest, especially when it takes place at such a complex and local and global situation. I had the honor to accompany some of the research activities, but honestly, I was relieved that I'm not responsible for such a challenging mission. Azzam Benedikt, respect for your efforts trying to answer such complex question, peace for Syria. I will not dive into, regarding the question, I will not dive into the different definitions of peace and peace building, but I always need to highlight that although the word peace gives an ostensible sense of a common meaning and understanding, it is far from it. Today, and more than yesterday, tomorrow, more than today, Syrians have and will have different expectations and needs of what peace should bring. Each from his or her own experience, suffer, loss, political point of view, place of residence, which all have changed dramatically over the past 10 years. Also, if we look at the international regional dynamics, we see that they are changing, but not reaching a tipping point to cause a significant change in Syria. Although 2020 was considered one of the least violent years in terms of the military operation, zero improvement at the political track was noted. The institutional committee, almost non-existent, and the regime doesn't even recognize its representatives in the committee as official representatives of the state. No improvement in the human rights situation, especially the case of the detainees, as you have mentioned, and the disappeared, and the case of the refugees. Internally, internal rifts and mistrust are persisting, and at times reinforced by regional and international rivalry, Arabs versus Kurds, opposition versus loyalists, revolutionary versus Islamists, sect versus sect, rural versus urban, IDPs, refugees versus their host communities. And on top of that, an economic crisis, a pandemic, and a new US administration. Against this background, the question of peace comes to the fore. Yes, it is complex, yet indispensable. And I'm looking forward to hear from Azzam and Benedikt the findings that they have reached in this research.
We're all looking forward to hear from Azzam and Benedikt and to present their study. So please, Azzam, will you start presenting the method and the key finding? Yeah, Azzam?
Bene, would you like to start? Bene will start. Yeah, hi everyone. I'm very happy to be here. Yeah.
Benedikt also.
I have to unmute myself. Hi everyone, thank you for joining today. Wadiaa, can you please share the presentation with us?
Mm-hmm. Okay, now? Do you see now?
Not yet.
Now. Okay, perfect.
Yes, this is, so to say, the cover page for our study we worked on, Azzam and me as a team, starting in end 2019. And both me and Azzam, we were working on a quite extensive a study which we want to present you today in a very compromised way. So we developed a small agenda for you. So first, we would like to introduce you to the methodology and to the background of our study. And then Azzam will take over to start talking about our actual findings and the events which took place and shaped our findings. So he will talk about the timeline, the actors mapping, and for sure the key findings. And then at the end, we would like to present you some recommendations which, so to say, derived out of our key findings on different levels when it comes to partnering up, for example, between international organizations and Syrian civil society organizations, if I may say so. Can you put the next slide, please?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, so as I said already, at the end of 2019, forumZFD asked us to do a study about let me call it at the moment, Syrian civil society, and what kind of environment and context we can find or we should know when we look from the outside perspective, when we look from the perspective, for example, from an international peacebuilding organization, and when we want to think about how can we in future, for example, connect and partner up with organizations inside Syria or in the neighboring countries, and what role and what responsibilities should come with this kind of task. And we were thinking about what Elias already described, facing a very complex situation and even a very complex a set of actors. And this is something I have to mention already from the beginning on. So if we talk now about the situation of the Syrian civil society, we started working on this topic out of the perspective from the Syrian people who are at the moment in Lebanon. So these were our target groups in order to get more information, and from the Syrian diaspora here in Germany to get the different kind of pictures and different kind of perspectives which are in the room when it comes to the role of the Syrian civil society. We, Azzam and me, we partnered up with House of Peace, with Elias and his team, in order to work together on the concept note. So for us, it was very, very important from the beginning to develop the right methodology and the right questions to ask about the Syrian civil society, because by already having the preliminary thoughts about this topic, we figured out there are so many different complex perspectives in the arena, which makes it very, very difficult. So we chose a methodology which was not a kind of fact-finding and fact-analyzing mission. It was more or less like collecting all the different perspectives and all the different thoughts, and bring these thoughts into an picture. So people who in future would like to work further on in this field, they could, or they might understand, okay, these are the things, these are thoughts, these are perspectives, these are the realities, different realities, which we might find on the ground. So we developed together the questionnaires, the research design, and we started getting interviews in Germany with the diaspora and with people, with partners and experts from different fields, in order to really shape and get a good entry point for the research. And with this background and with this feedback, we went into our field visits to Lebanon in beginning of 2020. And we had different interviews, face-to-face interviews with journalists, with people from NGOs, with different people who are active in Lebanon towards the context of the Syrians. And we did, with the help of House of Peace and with Elias, two focus group, one in the Bekaa Valley and one in Tripoli. So in order to get as well geographical differences with around 50 participants, which whom we figured out and discussed the study, our ideas and their perspectives. And we had a roundtable event in Beirut then with the management level of different NGOs and different organizations in Lebanon. We came back with our results, and we developed, Azzam and me, as so to say, the author team. We brought together the different results we got, and we developed an actors mapping and a so-called systemic factors mapping in order to show how the different and complex realities and perspectives, how they influence each other. So our idea was really to take the voice of the people, not analyzing it in the sense of bringing it into a fact world. It was more like bringing the things we heard and the perspective of the people together and create a kind of landscape, I would say, which could be helpful to understand the environment in the context we are facing. So these actors mapping and these results, we, once again, one time back, please. I'm not yet, we took to a validation workshop where we discussed the results here in Germany with the diaspora organizations in order to get, again, another perspective and to get a kind of validation of the results and to discuss our results. And based on this, we wrote then finally the study and did the assessment and the recommendations. Now, please, the next slide. Thank you very much. This is just a very short overview about the systematic we used. As I said, we used the systemic conflict analysis. And for us, as I said, it was very, very important to get into a kind of map all the different results and all the different perspectives. And we had a lot of different and even controversial results, which, as we brought them together as different factors in a systemic relation, we realized how things, how things are interrelated and how things are influencing each other, and where we or where people who work in this field should intervene or should design their intervention in order to have a good impact. And we were trying as well to include a different kind of mental models, which means in this case, we wanted to understand how the complex situation builds mental pictures within people, which then, so to say, shape their thinking or shape their way of looking at things. On the right side, this is a short overview about the techniques we used. So whenever we went into our interviews or whenever we went into our workshops, we tried to not only get the facts and the perspective out of the people, we tried to really understand their everyday life, I would say, in order to see how these everyday actions, these everyday thinking shapes behavior and the context. So we were looking not only about what they were thinking, we were trying to understand how they do things, how they organize themselves, and we really were, we as well were looking into what are the things they feel about this. So what are the feelings which are behind this? Yeah, next slide. I will hand over to Azzam.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Wadiaa, Bene, and Elias. Bene, can you mute yourself, please?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So, I mean, so we reach, I mean, this stage right now. I will try to introduce a timeline, actors mapping, and also to dig deep a little bit on our key findings. I mean, to start with, right now, Syria, I mean, one can argue that now we are observing the development of different Syrias right now. We have the Syria under the regime control. We have another Syria under the control of SDF, Syrian Democratic Forces, and also we have Syria in the north, which is supported by the Turkish intervention. So within this perspectives, Forum was trying to say, what can we do for Syria in the future? What kind of preconditions, so to speak, should be available before that we consider this option? Do we develop a peace-building program for Syria or not? So coming from this perspective, we thought that we don't have the answer, me and Bene. What we can do is that we develop a framework, and in partnership with a peace-building organization like Hope, that we develop together step-by-step cooperation, that we fill in within this process a knowledge. And within this, we don't seek an exact answers, but rather maybe good questions should be asked about when is it the right time to build up and think about peace-building intervention. What should be made? What about the people common experience on the ground? We thought that for the last years, Syrians and also, I mean, other international organizations, they were trying to build up field experience. What kind of lessons learned do we have from this experience? What kind of thoughts and ideas, and what kind of also opportunities one can think of the future? Please, next. So coming to the first step during our field work, we thought that maybe the first step is to try to answer this question on an iBird's view, who's doing what? And then we try to code this by, I mean, this is kind of the pro-regime, pro-opposition, and then also the actors which are more into international and regional perspectives. But within this actors mapping, one also can notice that these are the collective knowledge or answers or even articulation of the participants during the one-on-one interviews, during the roundtables and workshops. So we try to answer these questions through their own articulation. And here, when we've got an absence of actor, that also tells something about how people think about who's doing what inside Syria, and about the level of knowledge in regard to the local levels when it comes to internal dynamics and power sharing. One major point when it comes to peace building and Syrian civil society is the hubs. So we have 4 hubs during the last 10 years. I mean by that the hub which is in Gaziantep, one in Beirut, one in Jordan, and one in Iraq. One first observation is that each hub has its own development story. Each hub has its own borderlines, but also kind of narrative. And this is very much interlinked to the socio-political situation during or around the neighboring countries. So how the neighboring countries' governmental were responding to the Syrian crisis is very much important to understand, to clearly understand, and also deeply understand how we can address the development of Syrian civil society in the neighboring countries. On a next step is the step which is related to the European, but also the American based organizations. I mean by that the Syrians who were outside Syria before 2011, and when it comes with the popular uprising and the revolution, they tried also to seek their own contribution, so to speak, to Syria. So here we should also think of different layers of development of the civil engagement inside Syria, regionality, but also on international and diaspora level. Please, next. But before we go like more and more into analysis, me and Benny, we thought we should take just a step backward and try to shed some lights on the history of Syria when it comes to what is the relationship between the political and military players, but also with the civil society actors, so to speak. So one can think of that, to start with, that this is not a complete or comprehensive timeline, but rather it just was to help us try to start the discussion. So basically, one can think of that this relationship is always on an open struggle. That one can understand that this relationship that always the military and political Syrian players were always trying to control the civic sphere. And since the 50s, actually, since the unification in 1958 with Abdel Nasser formulating the Arab, so to speak, the Arab state, since that, when he preconditioned that before we do this, we should dismantle all the Syrian political parties. That one also could think of during this history, where we can think of the roots of the civil society engagement right now, which area that we can try to say that from here there is a connection, that post 2011 engagement is not coming like from from nothing. During our desk research, we are arguing that 2003, 2004, they were very important years in the history of the Syrian civil society engagement inside Syria. And influenced by the American invasion of Iraq, we can think of three different distinctive political expressions in the country. The one in Daraya with the group, Daraya Youth Group. They were a group of people, a group of youth actually. They come together and they try to do civic kind of small-scale civic engagement activities like cleaning the streets, organizing their neighborhood, but also they also try to publicly do a silent demonstration in favor of the Syrian, in favor of or supporting the Iraqi people against the American intervention. Whereas in Kamishli, we've got the Kamishli Intifada, so to speak, where it was started by through a football match between two football teams in Syria. And in Aleppo, we've got a student set in for around 300 students asking for specific rights. And we argue that this history is history of individuals as well. And tracing this history, we can think of, when it's heroic efforts have been made by youth to try to say something, to try to organize themselves, to try to contribute to the people, to the Syrian common good. But also, what can think of that, there's also between, thinking of Kamishli and Daraya, there's also a roots of the Syrian society divisions when it comes to what do we think about Syria when we think about the future? The Kurds some of the Syrian Kurds were in favor, so to speak, if one agree with this American intervention, because of a long history of violations against them inside the country, whereas other parts of the Syrian groups, they were totally against, and they were also expressing supporting emotions to the Iraqi people. Next, please. So coming to the key findings, these were the preliminary thoughts on Syria. For the four hubs that I've already talked about, we've been told that not only the local organizations, the Syrian organizations, they were lacking kind of strategic perspectives, what to do, how to do, what are the borderlines, but also the international organizations, they were also suffering from a huge amount of confusion. For example, we've been told that one international organization, it has two branches, one in Gaziantep, one in Beirut. They would have totally different border lines, and they would have totally a different way of dealing with the Syrian questions. That every one of them, that its own perspective, which could be in conflict, in a direct conflict with the other branch of the same organization. Also, we can also think of the relationships and the connections and the networks that within the Syrian civil society sphere, there were little to do to bridge between the organizations. And this is like for many reasons, but also for the complexities of each region that everyone was and till now is has to deal with. Last but not least is the functionality of the local based institutions. Since 50s till 2011, the only one opportunity the Syrians had to independently form a civic society entity was in the Badani 2011, June 2011. I'm sorry, that when was the very first establishment of the local councils. So just to conclude that the only opportunity to frame something independently and away from the security services and the mukhabarat and the whole prerequisite conditions was only coming when Syrians were outside, like functioning and operating outside the governmental sphere. Next, please. But also during the interviews, we've been talking about, okay, we know the political process and the prerequisite which is related to the transitional justice. But what about the society? What about the relationship between Syrians? What about the societal level of peace, of social peace? And one researcher, she was suggesting that the concept of accountability, when it comes to thousands against thousands, that can't be in practical means restricted to the idea of punishment. And then another question would be, if we assume that there is one day international community wellness and also support that they will enforce a solution, is this enough? Is this a sustainable idea to say, okay, we wait and we see what the future will bring us? She was suggesting that this notion of peace and peaceful and the relationship itself should be addressed from now, and we should not just wait, but rather that we should work on this kind of breaking down this terminology and trying to think of our Syrian concept for peace. Second point is, I will just talk about very briefly, is the personalized atmosphere within the Syrian civil society, meaning that the activism scene, which were on the rise in 2011, in 2012 was going into establishing new organizations in different areas. But then we got stuck because of different reasons. One is the systemic crackdown on activists from the regime, like side, but also like on a later level from other oppositional, but also extremist and jihadist groups targeting activists. But also there is this culture, the one-man show, that you have like a centralized elitist approach, thinking of civil society and thinking of civil engagement. And we think that this is a huge danger for the future of the Syrian peace building perspectives. Yeah, I think, yeah, next, I think now. Sorry. Yeah, so thank you so much for listening. Now I will go back again to Wadiaa. Yeah, thank you. And also please feel free, feel free to ask us questions, to comment, and yeah, thank you.
I would like to ask, do you hear me now? There's someone who wrote in the chat that there's a connection problem, so please log out and re-enter the room. I have a question again for Elias, because you worked in the field, and you, as you mentioned first, you helped in the beginning of this study. I would like to ask about your personal reflections and observations about the method in terms of methodology and the key findings of the study, also from your personal experience during the last years. Yeah.
Thanks, Wadiaa, and thanks, Azzam and Benedikt, for the presentation. Honestly, very challenging mission. Like I don't want to put myself in your shoes to find an answer for such a complex questions. And for me, hearing you is a bit different from a perspective of practitioner, someone who works in peace building, and from the perspective of Syrian, being myself Syrian as well, because there is the aspirations side and the hope that we have to hang to. At the same time, there is the reality and pragmatism and the practicality of things and what can be done and what cannot be done. I can share few of the thoughts that remained with me from the roundtables and the focus group discussion that we held in Lebanon, and that would complement a little bit what has been presented. So one of the idea that although now Azzam mentioned that there are hubs of civil society, but I know that even Azzam, I think that he would agree with me that there is yet not homogeneous civil society even in those different locations. So for instance, in Lebanon, the group that we met in Biqa' and their aspirations and thoughts and challenges were very different from those that we met in Tripoli. In Tripoli, for instance, we met with a group of mostly youth who some of them maintained the capacity to go back and forth to Syria, and some of them were actually delivering activities inside Syria. So for them, they still see it from the point of view, the question of peace, I mean, and when it is possible. They see it from the perspective of someone who's still in, but not locked inside Syria, but also from perspective of someone who's not totally outside and cut the relationship with their homes. And that was a little bit different with the group in Biqa', whose majority was who left Syria for good and who has no chance to go back now under the similar conditions, and that influenced a little bit their different perspectives. Even age-wise, the second group were mostly adults. So one group I can recall that they were mostly focusing on activities and what can be done in terms of practical. From a practical lens. The other group was more open, surprisingly, to hear the opinion of the others. For instance, the group in Biqa', they asked why we don't bring loyalists to the discussion, how we can discuss peace, supposedly opposition only, without having the perspective of the others. The youth group having the capacity to go back and forth to Syria, for many of them, they still have the capacity to interact with people from inside Syria, so they are not very aliens from the development of people mindsets inside Syria. And that was totally different also from the dynamics in the group in Berlin. So the background of participants definitely influenced. And as Benedikt said, that the research reflects perceptions. So that was some of the ideas that now I recalled. Based on the presentation, maybe one thing I would I would like to challenge Azzam Benedikt about regarding the findings, which is the lack of conceptualization or a comprehensive conceptualization of civil society in Syria. Just thinking of what is the standard, what is the reference in this case, and what could be a comprehensive concept or conceptualization of a Syrian civil society, knowing that it is an emerging sector, emerging field in terms like not as a discipline field as a space. So that was just a point to discuss maybe further in the discussion, in the presentation about the findings. I will add maybe a few other thoughts later.
I would like just to comment on Elias. I mean, for the BK, for the BK group, I mean, we had this idea that every area like Beirut, BK, Tripoli, Berlin, that we try to engage with the different kind of target groups. In BK, I think this was very present, that the whole discussion of peace is missing something. There is something, the elephant in the room is not addressed, which is the other perspective, which is the other narrative. But there is a clear precondition, which is protection and security, that equal grounding is just a precondition for any kind of fruitful conversation, productive conversation. For the question, I mean, Elias, I think for different reasons, but mainly I think of the whole, like the ongoing pressure, the always growing pressure about on individuals, but also on organizations, that there is no space for reflection, that there is no space for asking ourselves, what are we doing, why we are doing what we are doing, what is our role and responsibility? Are we seeking for direct political change? Are we do we have still this direct political aspiration? Some, like one participant suggested that the strategies we are thinking about in a different way, meaning that we think right now more on policy-based change rather than trying to enforce direct political representations. Meaning that he was saying that we want to think about the common ground for Syrians regardless to their political stances. But again, still the conversation is not valid if we don't think of protection and if you don't think of security. And security and protection is a personal question. It's not a geographical question. And here it doesn't tell that if an area, and we've noticed a major breakdown in causalities last year, but that doesn't put us in a post-war scenarios, and that wouldn't like put us in a scenario that people now are in a better position to discuss their interests, their positions, and then to reflect together about what they want to do and what is their idea about a civil society in the future.
Maybe I can say something to Elias, because I find the questions you raised or the perspective you discussed quite interesting, because I mean this exactly is one of our key findings, that you have such a diversity of different views, perspectives, and even possibilities. You know, you have it within the people who are in Lebanon now, and you have it even much more within the people who are, for example, now in the diaspora in Europe. You know, and this is something where we see a huge gap. You know, not only a gap, but a possibility or a room to discuss, negotiate, and exchange the differences, you know. So we had the feeling whenever we were discussing to participants or to people that they learned in a super fast way what the civil society should look like, what peace should look like, and the ideas of how this should look like, it all came with, for example, the ideas or the techniques or the methods which were brought from international NGOs, for example, you know. And I think it's quite important to keep in mind that there needs to be a space where people who are engaging there develop their own perspectives on this, you know, and reflect and challenge these. Thank you.
Elias?
Would I add something or?
Yeah. Yeah, of course.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
so
you have some time.
So also to add something to that, and I know that in the research, and this is something that you have mentioned several times during at least the roundtables about the limitation of the research, that you are not capable to go inside Syria to meet with people inside Syria. So you're not claiming that you are representing every single voice. But one thing also to add, that at least the profile of people that we met in Lebanon, be it in Bekaa or in Beirut or in Tripoli, they were all activists or people already engaged in civic work, be it in the humanitarian, the development, education, psychosocial support, volunteering, or being employees in local and international organizations. So one thing also would be interesting to hear or to see the perspectives of the common people, the public, and what their understanding of peace. Something that we do usually in our workshops at House of Peace when we work on social peace workshops is to ask, what is peace for you? And this is like a general question, something I mentioned in my first intervention, that everyone has different understanding of peace, though the word gives misleading sense that we all agree on what does that mean. But when it comes to the details, everyone would have different understanding. And to clarify what types of peace building we are working on, because that also would lead to different answers. Are we addressing political peace? Or are we talking about social peace, relationship between different communities? Because that also have different reactions from people. That would just emphasize on the point that Azzam mentioned, that in all cases, one of the main points mentioned by almost everyone is the issue of protection and the principles of dialogue. Like if there will be any kind of exchanges with the others in order to peace, in order to be able to building peace, is to have safe space, is to have equality between different sides, talking and dialoguing. So I just wanted to mention that.
There's also a question from the audience. I would like to share it now, not after or at the end of the session, because it's related to the topic, with those different perspectives in Syria. Is there any way around dividing Syria? I mean, if maybe. Do you hear me? Because I have some complexity here with the internet and things, but maybe the questions more related to the situation between the divided Syria, or the people in diaspora and people who are still living in Syria. If I understand the question well.
I mean, for me, I'm struggling. I couldn't understand really. Like, maybe with just some explanation.
Maybe
Bennett, Bennett.
I'm not sure if I got it right, but maybe the recommendations would answer it somehow. Because if I understood well, that with this complex image that we just drawn on the situation, is there a way around that, like for such a divided society? If I got the answer right, I think that.
Or maybe Gesek, if you are listening to us, please explain your question again to us, so maybe we can answer the. Okay. Yeah, I keep an eye on the timing, and I don't want to, because I feel it's, as Elias mentioned, the second part of the presentation will explain more to us about the key findings. So I would like to encourage Benedikt and Azzam to move to the second part of the presentation. Who would like to start with the key findings and recommendations?
Bennett, would you mind? You are unmuted. So.
I can start, yes. Can you maybe do the
screen?
No. Yeah, this is okay. This is a very general picture of our key findings, put it together as a systemic picture. And all in all, we collected, I think, around 300 different factors and perspectives, and we brought them together in what I said is the systemic map. And we tried to figure out different kind of underlying patterns of the systemic factors. And we came up with a different, so to say, circles, which includes all these factors. And these circles are, so to say, the big dynamics which influences each other. So out of this, and now maybe you go to the next slide. Out of this, we came up with different kind of recommendations towards this system, and these recommendations are very much directed to organizations who want to work in Syria with Syrian partners in order to understand the context they are in, and in order to put emphasis on what actual people on the ground need to work on peace building, or to work on not dividing the people in Syria. And we gave recommendations in 3 levels. One is the strategic level. This means like how should strategically ideas or projects be planned and implemented within organizations to have an impact. A second level would be the project and the program level. So how should programs be developed, which, so to say, should be run in a partnership between Syrian organizations and international organizations, for example. And our third level was the actual how to partner up level, the partnership level. How should partnerships look like between organizations which are coming from the international side and organizations which are coming from the Syrian civil society. And I would like to now present the recommendations we had from the strategic level. And there we had the idea, or there we had heard very often that it needs to be the right time to work on peace building in Syria. And as Azzam and as Elias already mentioned out, there needs to be certain kind of preconditions in place in order to be able to really implement projects which could lead to peace, or which could lead to something where people can start working on Syria. And we very often heard that the participants who are in Lebanon, for example, working on these methodologies or working on these steps, very often thought like it might be too early to implement a kind of peace, which is which derives from the idea of the peace an international organization would like to have. So this is something on a strategic level. When people start thinking about this, they need to really challenge and start thinking about the way of peace building which is necessary in Syria, which might be different from the way of peace building which people apply in other parts of the world. And therefore it needs a space. Another very important topic is that there needs to be a strategic thinking about how organizations within Syria can combine the different perspectives and their different capacities. So there should be, and this is, for example, a recommendation for organizations like forumZFD who can work, for example, inside Germany with the diaspora organizations. How can rooms or spaces can created where organizations who are working within the Syrian context can start coordinating or combining their capacities, or even start discussing about methodologies which are needed to be discussed in order to be adapted to the situation. Next slide, please. I think I hand over to Azzam.
Yeah, I mean, here just, so we've been told that now peace, one perspective, means surrender. It means that you want to take back Syria to the situation before 2011. That is, if you talk about peace and if you think about peace in times of unstoppable military campaigns against people, which is continuously causing IDPs in a different parts of Syria, that you mean that you want us just get back again to the situation with this keyword of stability, or bring back stability. So this is the concept of time is very important and very valid, but also it seems that now also this binary lens, meaning that it's either that you loyalist or you are opposition from opposition, or you are X or you are Y. It seems that this is lacking the actuality and to be accurate to understand the variations within the Syrian perspectives, meaning that you might have, for example, groups that they are in favor of a better situation. For example, for comparing Homs and Wadiaa. In Homs, it's super sensitive to talk about peace building. It's the topic itself, the word itself can't be there. The articulation of the whole language is distant from social peace, from peace building. Whereas in Wadiaa, there is a space for peace building initiatives and activities, using theater, using arts, using different different tools that people, they on a small scale, that they are trying to do something. So comparing like one region to other region inside Syria, maybe to some extent that there is only some few kilometers between them, that there is a difference, that the narrative could be changed, and that the interests and positions and also the needs of the people could be different. However, thinking about also the future perspective, I personally, I feel and I think we've heard a lot that there is still common needs for Syrians, and regardless of where they are right now, in which geography, that Syrians in different parts, that they still, they not only need assistance, but they think of that they live in dignity. Also, 1 minute. Yeah. In terms of the question that Kisak has been asking, how like complete different approach to governance. Yeah, this is the question. I mean, this is the main question, and how you think of a vision and for which can suits all Syrians. However, still the de facto players like the Syrian regime, the military militias in a different set, those can't be. I mean, people, they say those can't be part of the solution. And when we talk about social peace, there is a needed transitional justice phase, but still think how and when and what its question should be addressed. On a project level and a partner level, we think that agency is a key word, and how to empower, but also to sustain the Syrian agency of the organizations. So ownership here is a keyword, but yeah, I mean, Syrian Syrian team member was telling us, for example, in 2019 in Lebanon, when there was a huge crackdown on the Syrian civil society, he told us, what can we do? We keep silent. We don't go to the work, we don't go to the office, we don't do anything. We just close our doors and we keep silent. There's always this danger that the whole work of the Syrian civil society scenes in the neighboring countries could just disappear, or could also be in a great dangerous if the policies are in change. And then here, the international community, the international organizations, they have a keyword how to protect the organizations and how to protect also the staff, from like being in danger for enforced deportation or other means. So maybe the last point on here I would like just to talk about briefly is leadership. There is an issue of leadership, and there is an issue or question, so to speak, how to include participants from all different hierarchies in organizations to be contributing not only to the operational side of the work, but also to the strategic side, and how to think of a process that within this process that you can generate new figures and new individuals taking up responsibility and trying to collectively contribute to the development of the Syrian civil society scene. Yeah. So this is like some key messages we wanted to share, me and Bene. Maybe I try to answer this question for me personally. What is peace mean to me as a peacekeeper? I think for me, it's just that my interests are being addressed. I feel represented, and also my needs as a human being, like for education, for basic needs, that they are fulfilled. So peace in this means that I have an opportunity to deal with the conflicts based on equal rights and equal duties as well. Thank you so much.
Do you hear me now? Okay. If you want also to share or to answer the question, what does peace means for you? Muted. Okay. Thank you, Azzam, for answering. And I guess, sorry if I'm not pronouncing your name well, but he rewrite his question, and he means if there are religious groups and secular democratic groups and pro-Assad groups, if those groups have a complete different approach to governance. I think, he or she thinks that it would be difficult to integrate them in one state. maybe that's what the first question means, that what do you think around the dividing Syria?
Yeah, maybe I can start answering this question, and it's as well a bit an answer to what peace means to me, for example, because I think, like, especially this idea of dividing, of having a governance approach where people as a precondition can't live with each other. I think there you create already the next problem. So I think to have something which is an future-focused a communal approach should look like people should develop or people should be able to develop their own room or their own way to discuss exactly how they want to live together. And this needs a way of dealing peacefully with each other. Means like negotiating, coming to a conflict, but a conflict where you don't deal with violence, where you deal with different perspectives and where you discuss these different perspectives, you know. And I think this is something which should be on a long-term run a strategic entry point for organizations who coming from outside, who can play a very good, not mediating role, but facilitating role in these processes.
Thank you, Benedikt. Yes.
If I may, to answer this question, also I would link it to one of the recommendations about the right timing and premature peace building. Yes, definitely, there are sometimes like a better timing of suggesting or approaching different sides for peace building efforts. However, I feel that there is no right or wrong moment. It depends on what and how we are approaching peace, because there is no time we can say that this is the time where we can start working on peace, especially if we don't see peace as one chunk. So it's either or. There are a few things that maybe we can work on to lay foundation for future work that requires, for instance, building trust for some sides, or at least building capacities for people on the same side before getting into maybe dialogue or negotiation with others. So there is always a chance to start working on peace, but it depends on what, and it's definitely sensitive when it comes to decide what and how to address. For instance, I remember in 2017 when the Ghouta, like the suburb of Damascus, was under besieged and starvation, forced starvation. We used to deliver social peace building workshops in Lebanon with different local community groups. Some of whom had relatives in those areas, and they didn't feel that they were offended by what we were presenting, simply because we acknowledged the situation. We said that maybe for you this is not the right timing. Maybe what we are talking about now sounds a bit like outside this word for you. But if there is anything that we can do to improve our situation now, so we don't present peace as a luxurious concept of living in la vie en rose, but to improve maybe relationship that would have direct impact on our day-to-day life, people would see that as essential, not complementary. And I totally agree with the question about the complexity now of bringing different sides, and especially with time, those sides and groups with different backgrounds, different doctrines, different mindsets of how they can live again together and dialogue. No, this is very complicated and it's very challenging. And with time, it's getting more and more challenging now to convince Kurds and Arabs to live peacefully again together in places where both have caused in forced a displacement of the others, or even trying to suggest a discussion or dialogue with those who might be supporting one of the political groups that you are against. But again, to link that with my previous answer, because it is very challenging, but because it is again indispensable, we need to start. We need to start doing something, and we need to rely on the process that would allow those discussions and this transformation to take place, which will never happen in a second or two. It requires maybe longer than the age of the conflict itself to reconcile, because we need now not only to deal with the present, but also with the past, to reconcile with so many things, and to deal with the memory of wars. So yes, it takes a lot of time, but this complexity doesn't imply doing nothing. But in the context, it forces us to ask ourselves what we can start doing today.
Actually, I have one more question, because now I have time to ask you, because I was busy like leading the presentation, but maybe when we think about the values that we need to enhance and to support in the future or the upcoming years, how do you think about these values? What do you think there's something really so important to keep an eye on it, or to support the young generation to think of it from your position and your perspective? Because I know it's a brainstorming question more than I don't have an answer, for example, because it's very complicated and sensitive topic for me. But yeah, maybe you can add some ideas or thoughts about that.
Yeah, maybe I can start, if you allow. So one thing I was quite impressed when I was listening to all these different people, youth, elderly women, whatever, in the field was that they all carried their own kind of creativity with them, and for me, it was very difficult to bring together these big questions you have when you come or when you get to start thinking about this context. How can we remove the regime? How can we do this? How can we do this? These are things which are so big. But on the other side, when you go into the field and you see people on a daily level, on an everyday level, thinking about this, developing ideas, developing small trainings, doing their own initiatives, doing something for their neighbors, which might be even Lebanese, for example. I think this is something you can quite count on. And for me, this is a way to look at this as well. I think you need to enhance this kind of creativity capacities which people start and people have. I think this is something which needs to be supported rather than, for example, discussing the question of how can we remove a regime? How can we do this? These for sure are questions which needs to be removed, which needs to be addressed. But above all these very, very difficult, complex questions, I think we less look into things which are there. you know. And I think this is something we should have as an international organization, for example, as an attitude to count on the creativity of people.
I mean, I will try to tackle this question from different perspective or a different angle. I think there's two ideas. I mean, from one hand, distance on a different levels. So distance to 2011 as the year of everything in Syria. Distance to Syria in terms of how many kilometers I have from here, the space that I live, to Syria, and distance as well to the dream of future, of my dream as a Syrian. What kind of Syria do I have? So in this perspective, distance is essential to formulate this relationship with how I do think about it in today's world. In contrast to distance, there's communication, and this concept of that within civil engagement, within that voluntary opportunities, that I might have an opportunity to meet someone that I've never met, and that might have an opportunity to talk to Syrian from a certain background and try to have this conversation. What kind of Syria do we imagine or envision for the future? I think here the civil society is, like, in terms of organizations and sphere, play a major role to open new challenge between individuals and between also groups. And within this perspective, generating values, I think, could be coming from this process that actors, individuals, and I don't do restrict this concept, the civil engagement, to organizations, but rather to every single action that is in line with the common good. That within this continuous action, that we might understand what do we mean by freedom? What kind of freedom do we need? I mean, I think this is my personal observation, that we, to very far extent, Syrians agree on dignity as a core concept of our lives, but I think we have different takes, but maybe conflicting takes on freedom as a core, as an idea, as a value as well. So in this mean, I think it's a process centered. It's not a result centered. That it is something that comes out of a more and more communication between individuals, groups, and trying to think together. What are the shared values of our society? You're muted.
Sorry. Elias, would you like to add anything else?
Honestly, if I would think of it not as the values of the Syrian society, but rather the values that need to be promoted among peace builders or those involved in peace building, I think openness and readiness to be present with one another's narratives is very important. People have different experiences, had different experiences throughout the past 10 years, with different suffer, kind of loss, and that would definitely influence their positioning towards the other. So I think that acknowledging the suffer that hasn't ended yet for so many, especially for those who still have like family members disappeared or detainees, or who don't know yet if they are alive or not, if they are under torture or not. This is continuous suffer. So acknowledging this, I don't know what the value, what I would call that, to summarize it in a word, but to acknowledge that the person in front of me maybe has different different story that I'm not aware of, and be ready to accept the reality, maybe that I'm not the only person who has suffered or lost, which is not easy. Maybe empathy. I don't know. I haven't thought of it honestly before, but that's what came to my mind when you asked the question.
Thank you. Thank you for all your answers. There are two more questions. One from Christian. I will deliver that to you. First, he thanked you for the presentation, and he has a question. Yeah, do you hear me? Okay, sorry. And he has a question. Today, Germany announced to support the rebuilding infrastructure in Syria with about 1.7 billion euros. There are different voices in the German public sphere, from large humanitarian organizations like Caritas or Welthungerhilfe, advocating of different political approaches. However, Syrian civil society rarely seems to be leading the discussion, considering the recommendations of your study. How likely do you think that the CSO will be able to close the gap and participate in the discussion more prominently? Wow, such a complicated question. For me, it's a start from the first, the first part, like rebuilding infrastructure in Syria. That's already very complicated. But
I mean,
if anyone wants to answer.
maybe I think of two ideas, maybe just to brainstorm. I think from my personal perspective, I would think that it's too dangerous to interlink the Syrian needs with political prerequisites. So and now with COVID-19, I think the people, they are suffering from drastically complicated situation. And I think Syrians need help. That means that they need help. And then the responsibility of how to utilize this help without bring harm on them on a political level, I think this is the task assigned to the international community. It's not assigned to local organizations. However, I think also one idea is there is a network, like Syrians organizations, they are building networks and coalitions and alliances, and they are trying to focus on one topic, either on economical or social justice or others. I think this is one way to amplify the voice, but also to challenge this perspective, to challenge the perspectives that that could say that we don't care about the side results. We don't care about what could happen for the people, and there's no alternatives. That we have to deal with specific actors in order to proceed. I think this is not invalid. There's always alternatives. There's always possibilities and new possibilities that this help should continue, but without bring harm on the people themselves.
Maybe when I can add as well to this question. So how can you close this gap? And I think we tried to answer it with our recommendations regarding the partnership level, which should be looked at. And I think there are different ways. There is one way, and this is a recommendation towards international organizations who should just build their programs and their projects around a partnership model, which is much more on an eye level rather than a level where an organization comes and implements methodologies. So this idea of having an honest and open discussion between diaspora organizations who are already very much established, but as well organizations who are establishing themselves, and try to figure out what are the needs of these organizations in order to become voiceful and to get the agency of the fellow people, you know. So I think this is something where international organizations can open a bit up their eyes. On the other hand, there is a lot of money going into Syria. We got today the Brussels 5 conference, which where people spend money, and I see it as well a bit like. You see there as well, even the spending is done in a way which doesn't look at the needs of, for example, the civil society. You know, so I think there needs to be a more sensitive, a conflict-sensitive way from the side of international organizations to rethink their partnership models.
If I may add also something that will build on the last thing mentioned on conflict sensitivity. It is such a challenging question, to be honest. Not only in terms of the coordination or the localization agenda and supporting local CSOs to lead this process, but there is a principal question about reconstruction in Syria today, and the impetus behind that today. What has changed? If the political situation is the same, no reforms, political or security reforms. So why today? I would think of the situation in Europe, in the region, and inside Syria to understand what has changed. Is it linked to the latest decisions to repatriate some of the people who from Europe back to Syria? Would that lead to normalization of relationship again with the regime? For instance, now that a Russian-led conference in Syria for the return of refugees. So we need to look at that, at this decision from the lens of everything else happening around. There are, of course, the technical and practical issues of how we formulate partnerships, what need to be delivered and how. But also we need to understand that from the broader view. And in all cases, yes, conflict sensitivity should come first, because I know, and I still have family members inside Syria, and I know the struggle. The economic situation is unbearable anywhere, and for me, it's a moral question. Can I say now that I'm against reconstruction inside Syria, while my sister, for instance, or other relatives are still there and they are suffering daily? I don't have I have the moral obligation to say yes, I am providing any support for the people. But at the same time, thinking at the long term, I cannot but think from a conflict sensitivity point of view, would this immediate and short-term support lead to exacerbate the situation and maintain the conflict for another 10, 20 years, preserving the same system as it is? That's a big question, honestly. And I hope that the decision taken is not only a reaction to local dynamics about the return of refugees, about the fatigue, the war fatigue, and it has some strategic objectives towards not necessarily political objectives, not to put it there, but objectives about real change that would not only support people today, but also provide a better future.
Thank you, Elias, for your answer, Azzam and Benedikt. There are one more question. Actually, there are two, but I don't know. We're already 1 hour 30 minutes, so I will ask you the last question, and it was from Nadine. She asked, First, she thanks you for the presentation, and she was pleased attending this session. She also wanted to ask you, what's your point of view regarding the effectiveness of working towards peace building, given the difficulties to work with Syrians within Syria. In other words, how effective is it to work with Syrians outside Syria? I mean, the future thema about the whole people who are working in civil society question. Who would like to answer?
Maybe I can start again. I think very shortly, I mean, given the time, it's very effective to work with Syrian outside Syria because they have a space to invent, and they have a space to develop and to implement. And I think you have to differentiate between the diaspora, the Syrians working in neighboring countries, and the Syrians working inside Syria. For sure, they are very, very valid and very, very important entry points for the situation to work inside Syria. But we figured out as well in our recommendations that there's a lack of communication between all these different levels. So, for example, there is a lack of communication between the people inside Syria and the organizations working in the diaspora. And I think this needs to be tackled as well, this gap, you know, and this is something you need to have in mind. But it is very effective because the organizations mostly build themselves up from the scratch, and having this experience in mind, it's a huge plus.
Thank you, Benedikt. Azzam, Elias, would you like to add anything?
Maybe I just try to add like one point which is related to the diaspora, the Syrian diaspora. I think the Syrian diaspora is characterized by in Germany example, we have kind of around 800,000 Syrians living here, and every single family, they have their own bigger family, the big family in Syria. And I think there is a huge potential to come around and try to address this question, because I also think that every one of us in Germany, we have this question: what could we do for Syria? How we can contribute as individuals? What can we do also as people trying to build up their own ways in the exiled countries, so to speak? So I think there's a huge potential here, and also I would also stress that people inside Syria should not be abandoned, should not be left alone because of the political complexities and because of the whole spectrum of what to do, what not to do. I mean, the one thing that there's always a way, and there's always maybe ideas, new ideas to communicate to people, to bring support to them, and to bridge between Syrians, regardless of the geography and other the factors.
I fully agree with you, Azzam.
Thank you so much.
And just one point from my side. Related to the timing, I totally agree with what has been said. Working with Syrians, especially in neighboring countries who are in millions, is definitely needed, and we cannot wait until they are back to Syria, because there are things that we can start prepare from now for when the time is ripe for proper retain with dignity, with security, safety, and volunteering return. So working now is essential, and if not now, when?
Yeah.
Wow. Such a very complicated questions, difficult questions, and also I know you pushed yourselves like really to do and to answer the best, and I know it's somehow very difficult to cover all the thema, and yeah, I had many other questions, but in terms of time, sorry, we're already like 5 minutes extra, so yeah, but it was really an interactive conversation. Thank you too much for the presentations and for presenting the key findings thing. Yeah, and anyone wants to add anything before? Okay.
Thank you so much, Wadiaa. Thank you so much. I also, I think we thank all the listeners. We hope that the publication will be out, I think, within like a couple of days.
Yeah,
so
it's very important
you may like visit forumZFD website or sign up for the newsletter. So yeah.
Yeah, we want to remind the audience for Arabic speakers that tomorrow there will be a session, like almost the same session, but in Arabic for Arabic speakers tomorrow. Thank you, everyone. And I'm really so glad to moderate and to listen to your ideas and thoughts. Yeah, maybe.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wadiaa. Yeah. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks for hosting me.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.